Toddler discovered a German shepherd guarding a fire pit. What happened next shocked everyone. Have you ever seen a miracle unfold right before your eyes? This story is a powerful reminder that anything is possible when love and determination collide. A journey of heartache, hope, and triumph that will leave you breathless. Like, share, and subscribe, you won't want to blink for a second. The field behind the town had long been forgotten. Once, it had been the place where neighbors gathered for summer bonfires, where music and laughter had carried into the night. Now it was nothing more than an abandoned lot, overgrown with weeds and littered with old memories. In the center of it stood the fire pit, a ring of blackened stones, its ashes long cold. Or at least, that's what people thought. On this quiet afternoon, a little girl in a blue dress wandered close, chasing a butterfly across the grass. She was only a toddler, her steps wobbly but filled with excitement. The wind tugged at her dress as she giggled, running toward the edge of the forgotten lot. The butterfly darted away, but something else caught her attention. A faint sound drifted from the direction of the fire pit. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then it came again, low, sharp, and trembling. A growl. The girl stopped, her laughter fading. Her small hand tightened around the toy she carried, and she tilted her head, listening. The sound was strange, not like the playful bark of a neighbor's dog. This one was deeper, raw, almost protective. Curiosity pulled her forward, stronger than fear. Step by step, her tiny shoes pressed into the dirt as she followed the sound. The fire pit came into view. Its stones were cracked and covered in soot, and inside the circle of ash something moved. The girl squinted, her breath catching in her chest. A pair of eyes glowed faintly in the shadow, reflecting the sunlight like two pieces of glass. Then the shape rose, a large German shepherd, its fur rough, its body thin, standing tall as though daring the world to come closer. The little girl froze. For a heartbeat, she thought about running back to her grandmother's porch. But there was something in the way the dog stood, something that kept her feet rooted in place. He wasn't just lurking near the pit. He was guarding it. His body curved protectively around the circle of stones, his head lowered, his growl steady but weak. His eyes never left her. The girl's heart thumped fast, but not only with fear. She could see the exhaustion in his legs, the dust clinging to his fur, the way his chest rose and fell as if every breath was an effort. He looked tired, hurt, but determined to stay where he was. She didn't understand why, but even in her innocence, she knew this dog was protecting something. Her small hand rose halfway, as if to wave. "Hi," she whispered, her voice no louder than a breeze. The shepherd's ears flicked. He didn't attack. He didn't leave. He simply held his ground, guarding the pit like a soldier standing watch. What could a dog be guarding in a place so empty, so forgotten? The girl's innocent eyes blinked, wide with wonder, while the shadows around the fire pit seemed to hold their breath. She had no way of knowing then that this single moment, this strange meeting in a field of ashes, would unravel a story that would shock the town, break its silence, and leave every heart changed forever. Morning in the countryside begins slow, like someone lifting a curtain a little at a time. Dew sits on the grass. The sky is soft and pale. Birds talk from fence posts and wires. At the edge of town there is a wide, open lot where people used to gather. In the middle of that lot is a circle of blackened stones, the old community fire pit. Years ago, it was the heart of warm nights. Folks brought guitars and tin mugs. Children ran in loops with sparklers. Someone always told a story that made everyone quiet at the same time. Laughter rose with the smoke, and the smell of wood fire clung to jackets long after the flames were out. Time, though, is a strong wind. It moved on. The fairs shifted to the park in the next town. New families came who didn't know the old songs. A storm one fall knocked branches into the lot, and no one bothered to clear them. Weeds pushed up between the stones. Thistles climbed the fence. What had once been a bright, busy place turned into a patch of wild ground that people passed without a glance. Adults called it the old place and meant not our problem. Kids whispered that something lived there. Some said a fox. Some said something worse. They dared each other to throw a rock toward the circle and then run. Nobody stayed long. Next to that lot stood a little house with a white fence that needed paint. A grandmother lived there with her granddaughter, a toddler in a blue dress who loved to twirl. Their days were simple in the best way. The grandmother rose early, put on her kettle, and stepped to the porch with a mug that steamed in the cool air. The little one followed as soon as she woke, feet pat-pat on the boards, hair sticking up like dandelion fluff. They watched the sun find the tops of the trees. They listened to the far sound of a tractor. The grandmother would say, "Good morning, world," and the little girl would copy it in a whisper, proud of the words. Breakfast was toast, sometimes with jam if there was any left from last summer. The girl would sit on the step and swing her legs while the grandmother tied her shoes for a walk. They didn't go far, just to the edge of the lot and back, picking flowers, counting butterflies, tapping fence posts as if they were piano keys. The grandmother always kept one eye on the road and one eye on the old fire pit, the way you watch a pot on the stove that you don't trust yet. She warned the girl kindly, not sharply. "We don't go into the lot," she said. "It's rough ground. We can look from here." The child nodded and repeated the rule the way children do, as if the saying of it made it theirs. By midday, the lot looked like a sea of green waves. Tall grass swayed in the breeze. Broken bottles hid in the shadow of weeds. The ring of stones in the center had turned a dull black, like old bread left too long in the oven. Ash sat there in a low bowl, gray on gray, and if you stood downwind you could still smell the ghost of burnt wood. It wasn't strong anymore. It was faint, like a memory that doesn't want to fade but can't help it. Sometimes a thin wisp of smoke rose at noon when the sun warmed the stones. People said that was nothing but heat and the last of the soaked-in soot coming back to say hello. Afternoons were for chores and little games. The grandmother hung laundry on the line, and the sheets snapped like sails. The girl liked to hand up clothespins one by one, face serious with the job. When they were done, the grandmother would give her a small task: water the potted basil, sweep the porch crumbs, carry the mail inside. Every task ended with the same praise, "Good helper." The girl would smile because those two words could make any day feel strong. Sometimes the girl wandered to the fence and walked along it, one palm brushing the flaking paint. Through the slats she could see the lot and, in the center, that circle of stones. It pulled the eye even when you didn't want it to. Maybe it was the shape. Maybe it was what the shape reminded people of: gathering, warmth, stories. Today, the air was still and the lot seemed asleep. A grasshopper snapped from a blade and vanished. A crow landed on a post, looked left and right, and flew away again. The girl pressed her nose to the gap in the boards. Dust lifted from the lot in slow breaths. The ashes were quiet. The circle held its shadow. She counted the stones out loud, 1, 2, 3, until she reached the number where she always forgot what came next. Numbers didn't matter as much as the counting. It felt like talking to time. After lunch, the grandmother sat by the window with her mending. A button. A hem. The girl built a tiny city from bottle caps and smooth stones she had collected. She made streets with twigs and parked her toy car beside a leaf she decided was a house. When she was finished, she clapped once, pleased with her town inside a town. Then she stood and stretched the way she had seen cats do, arms high, mouth wide, a little squeak of a yawn escaping her. The day warmed. Heat shimmered over the lot in a wavy veil. From the porch you could see the air moving above the stones. It made the circle look like it was breathing. The grandmother noticed and frowned without meaning to. "Strange," she murmured. "It's been years." The girl heard the sound of the word, not the meaning, and turned her head toward the lot. She didn't know the history, only the shape of the place and the way grown-ups spoke softer when they mentioned it. She asked for permission to play near the fence, and the grandmother said yes with the same rule as always: eyes on the house, feet on the path, don't go inside the lot. "Okay," the girl said, and skipped to the gate, letting it click shut behind her. She knelt in the dust, drew a circle with a stick, and filled it with tiny stones as if she were making her own small fire pit that belonged to no one but her. It was quiet enough to hear the world's small sounds: a beworking clover, the tick of cooling metal on a far-off car, the low moan of wind slipping through a cracked board. Behind those came the deeper quiet, the kind that lives in old places. It felt like a held breath. The girl felt it too, without having a name for it. She paused in her game and looked up. The ash in the real fire pit shifted. It wasn't much. It was the kind of movement you might blame on wind. But there was no wind just then. The grasses had stilled. The sheets on the line drooped and waited. The girl stood, both hands dusty, and pressed her fingers back into the gap in the fence. She peered through. Something dark passed across the circle and was gone. A shadow? A wing? Her heart tapped a little faster, the way a rabbit's foot taps when it wonders what it should do next. She thought of her grandmother in the house, needle flashing in the light. She thought of the rule and how it had always felt more like love than like a wall. The smell of old burn reached her, faint but real. She tasted it at the back of her throat. Ash has a taste like paper turned to smoke. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and stared harder. The stones made their ring. The ash lay low and soft. A single black feather sat on the brink, shining blue at the edges where the sun caught it. Then came a sound, so soft she almost missed it. It wasn't a bird call or the buzz of an insect. It was lower, deeper, and it seemed to come from the very center of the circle. A growl, she thought, but not the rough kind that tries to scare. This one was tired. It had a tremble in it, like a voice that has been calling for too long. The hair on her arms lifted. She didn't feel afraid the way a bad dream makes you afraid. She felt alert, like someone had said her name from another room. She held her breath and listened again. The sound came a second time, a little longer, and then there was a short, sharp bark, cut off, as if whoever made it didn't want to give too much away. The girl looked left and right. No one else was there to hear it. The town seemed far suddenly. Even the porch felt far. It was just her, the fence, the lot, and the circle of stones breathing heat into the still day. She took one small step along the fence to a wider gap, the one where a board had split near the bottom. She bent, pressed her cheek to the rough wood, and looked across the lot at the pit. A shift in the ash again, a lift of darker shadow, and then a shape settled low inside the circle as if refusing to leave it. The growl rolled out once more, soft, warning worn out. The little girl's lips parted. "Hello," she whispered, the sound too small to go far. No answer came except a hush and the faintest scrape of nails on stone. She swallowed. The air felt thicker now, like the world had decided to lean closer to listen with her. She stood very still, hands at her sides, blue dress brushing her knees, and knew without knowing how she knew that the old fire pit was not empty. Something was there. Something that had a reason to stay. Something that did not want anyone to come near, and at the same time wanted someone to hear. She stayed by the fence, heart steadying, eyes wide. The growl faded to a hush. A small, almost hidden whine replaced it for a second, then fell quiet again. The girl glanced back at the house, then turned her face to the lot once more. The circle of stones held its secret close, and the afternoon held its breath with it. The fence had always been the line she wasn't meant to cross. Her grandmother's words echoed in her head even when she wasn't trying to remember them. Not in the lot, little one. It's rough ground. Most days, those words were enough. But today, the sound from the pit pulled at her like a string tied to her chest. She pressed her cheek once more to the broken board, listening for the growl she had heard before. The silence after it only made her more certain. Something was waiting there. The girl's small hand slipped along the gate latch. It clicked open, louder than she wanted, but the yard and porch behind her stayed still. She glanced back once, as if to ask permission from the air itself, then stepped forward. The grass brushed her knees, whispering as she pushed through. Her blue dress shone against the green, a bright, soft color in a place that had forgotten gentle things. She walked slowly, but each step was certain. The closer she moved to the fire pit, the heavier the air seemed to grow. The stones rose taller, dark and scarred, and the smell of old ash pressed into her nose. She could feel it on her tongue, dry and bitter. Her toy slipped from her fingers and landed in the weeds behind her, forgotten. All she could see now was the circle. When she reached the edge, her breath caught. The stones curved up from the dirt like the rim of an old bowl. Inside, the pit was a hollow of gray and black, shadows pooling thickest in the center. At first, it looked empty, only ashes and broken sticks. But then she saw the movement. Slow, steady rising. A shape unfolded itself from the pit, tall and lean, with fur that caught the light in dull patches. The German shepherd stood before her, his body half hidden in shadow. His legs were thin, his sides sharp with hunger, but his stance was strong, a wall built out of what little strength he had left. Ash clung to his paws and dust streaked his back. His head was low, eyes fixed on her, unblinking. They glowed faintly in the light, not with magic, but with a watchful fire that made the girl's chest tighten. He made a sound then, a growl that trembled at the edges, not fierce but worn. It was the sound of a creature ready to defend, even if it had nothing left to give. His lips curled just enough to show teeth, but not the way of attack, more the way of warning. The girl's feet froze, toes at the edge of the stone ring. Her small hands curled into fists against her dress. Fear prickled along her arms. But alongside the fear came something else, something even stronger. She looked into the shepherd's eyes, and what she saw there was not rage. It was exhaustion. It was pain. His legs shook as if he had been standing guard too long, and the way his chest heaved told her he was fighting just to stay upright. Her head tilted slightly, her eyes softening. Compassion rose in her like a tide. She didn't know the word for it, but she knew the feeling, like when she saw a bird shivering in the rain, or when she wrapped her blanket around her doll so it wouldn't be cold. Her heart told her this dog was not her enemy. He was a protector, guarding something unseen, too tired to keep going, but too loyal to walk away. She crouched slowly, her dress pooling around her in the dirt. Her small voice broke the silence, trembling but kind. "Hi," she whispered. The shepherd's ears flicked, his eyes narrowing. His growl deepened for a breath, then wavered as if even his warning was running out of strength. The girl held still, her gaze steady but soft. She didn't reach forward. She didn't shout. She only watched him, her innocence offering what the world had not, patience. For a long moment, they stayed like that, the child in blue and the shadowed dog in ash, two fragile lives staring across a circle of stone and silence. Her heart pounded, but it was no longer just fear. It was the weight of knowing she was standing before something broken yet brave. And even as her grandmother's warning whispered in her ear, the little girl could not step back. She leaned forward, her eyes gentle, and whispered again as if to promise him he was not alone. "It's okay." The shepherd did not move, but his growl softened, fading into a tired breath. His eyes stayed locked on hers, glowing faintly in the ash-dark pit, as if searching for something he hadn't believed existed anymore: kindness. And in that moment, the line between fear and compassion blurred, leaving only the fragile beginning of trust. The little girl stayed crouched at the edge of the fire pit, her knees pressed into the dirt, her eyes fixed on the shepherd standing inside the ring of stones. Now that she dared to look longer, she began to see details she had missed in that first rush of fear. The dog was not whole. His fur, once meant to shine with strength, was tangled and dull. Patches of it were matted with soot and dirt, while other places showed the raw skin beneath, angry red marks and bruises that told a story she could not fully understand. Along his shoulder, the fur was burned away in a patch the size of her hand, the skin there cracked and scarred as if it had been pressed too close to fire. His ribs showed clearly, like the slats of a fence. Each breath he took made them shift, sharp against his sides. His paws were blackened, not from natural color but from ash, as though he had walked through flames and never found clean ground again. A limp made one leg shake when he shifted, but still he did not leave the pit. He stood with a posture too proud for his condition, as if leaving the circle was not an option. The girl's eyes grew wide, not only with pity but with wonder. Why would a dog so weak, so hurt, stand guard here? His growl had quieted now, replaced with the steady hum of his breathing. She could see his gaze flicker past her for a moment, down into the pit itself. The shift was subtle, but it was enough. He wasn't just standing there for himself. He was protecting something. The thought landed in her small chest with a weight she couldn't name. What could he be guarding? Something hidden in the ash? Someone? Her heart whispered that it was life, fragile, waiting, in need of his strength. And suddenly, his wounds, his refusal to leave, all made sense to her in the simple way children understand truths adults overlook. He was hurt because he had chosen to stay. The shepherd's eyes returned to her, and a low rumble shook in his throat. It was weaker than before, more warning than threat, as if to remind her that this ground belonged to him, that whatever lay behind him in the pit was not for her to touch. Still, the rumble faded quicker this time, breaking into a sigh that rattled with exhaustion. The girl thought of her grandmother's kitchen, the smell of warm bread, and the way she always kept a small crust tucked into her pocket when she played outside. She didn't plan it, but she liked having it there, a little piece of home she could carry with her. Her hand slipped into her dress pocket now, and sure enough, her fingers found the hard curve of bread, slightly crumbled but still good. Slowly, carefully, she pulled it out. Her palm was tiny, her hand trembling, but she laid the bread flat so he could see it. The shepherd's ears flicked back, his nostrils twitching as the scent reached him. His eyes narrowed, suspicion rising again, but his body betrayed him. Hunger pulled at him harder than mistrust. He licked his lips once, then froze as though caught between two choices, guarding or reaching. The girl's heart beat faster, not from fear this time, but from hope. She placed the bread gently on the stone closest to her, not throwing it, not pushing it too near, just offering it as if to say, "This is yours if you want it." She leaned back a little, making herself smaller, less of a threat. The shepherd shifted his weight. His paw moved forward, pressing into the ash. His body trembled with the effort. Every motion looked painful, but he did not complain. His eyes never left hers, even as his nose lowered to the bread. For a second, it seemed like he might snap at it and retreat, but instead he paused. His nostrils flared. The faintest sound came from him, not a growl, not a whine, but something in between, as if he was trying to decide what to believe. The girl whispered softly, her voice carrying across the stones. "It's okay." Her words floated in the still air, wrapping around the dog like a blanket too light to warm but heavy enough to comfort. His ears twitched, and then, slowly, he took the bread. His jaws closed carefully, not harsh, and the crunch of the crust was the only sound in the empty lot. He chewed once, twice, then lifted his head again to look at her. The girl's eyes brightened. She smiled, small and shy, and whispered again, "Good boy." Something shifted then, not in the world around them, but in the space between them. The shepherd's body lowered slightly, his head dipping toward the ground as though the effort of guarding and doubting at once was too much to carry. His eyes softened, the hardness in them breaking into something tired and uncertain. For the first time, his tail gave the smallest twitch, not a wag, but a thought of one. He stepped back, returning to his place in front of the pit, as if to remind her of his duty. But the look he gave her was no longer the sharp glare of a stranger. It was different now, torn between mistrust and hope, between the instinct to protect and the desire to believe. The little girl stayed quiet, her hands folded in her lap, her heart swelling. She didn't understand the whole story, not yet. She didn't know what was hidden in the ashes behind him. But she knew one thing clearly: he had taken the bread. And in that small act, he had also taken the first step toward trust. The lot stayed silent, but it no longer felt empty. A bond had begun, fragile as glass, but real. And as the sun tilted lower in the sky, its light caught on the shepherd's eyes, making them gleam not only with firelight but with the faintest spark of something he thought he had lost long ago: hope. The little girl's heart thumped as she watched the shepherd chew the last of the bread. His body was thin, his fur burned and bruised, but his eyes still carried that steady glow, the glow of someone who would not abandon his post. Even after the bread was gone, he turned back toward the pit, lowering himself protectively in front of it as if to say, "This is mine to guard, and I won't move." For the first time, the girl noticed the faintest whimpering sound from behind him. It wasn't his voice. It was smaller, weaker, almost hidden beneath the rasp of his breathing. Her eyes widened. There was something else inside the pit. Something alive. She gasped, stumbling back from the stones, then spun on her heel and ran. Her small feet pounded against the dry ground, her blue dress flaring in the wind. "Grandma!" she cried, her little voice sharp and urgent. "Grandma!" Her grandmother dropped the mending from her lap and rushed to the porch. Seeing the child running from the lot, cheeks flushed, eyes wide, she hurried forward, her heart already racing. "What is it, little one?" "There's a dog," the girl panted, tugging at her grandmother's apron. "He's hurt. He's guarding something in the fire pit." The words alone were enough to draw attention. In a small town, one voice of alarm can carry faster than smoke. Within an hour, neighbors began gathering near the old lot. Men came with ropes and lanterns, women with baskets and blankets, children trailing behind, curious but kept at a distance. Their voices rose in murmurs, half curiosity, half guilt. "I heard barking a few nights ago," one man admitted, shifting uncomfortably. "I thought it was just strays fighting," another muttered. "I heard it too," said a woman, pressing a hand to her mouth. I ignored it." The old fire pit, once the center of joy, now stood as a place of shame. They had walked past the cries for days, maybe longer, and done nothing. And it had taken a toddler, a child who should have been afraid, to finally listen. When the first group of men approached the pit, the German shepherd rose instantly. His body shook from weakness, but his snarl tore through the silence like a jagged blade. His lips peeled back, teeth flashing in the dimming light. The sound that came from him was stronger than anyone expected, hoarse but fierce, the voice of a soldier refusing to retreat. "Easy, boy," one man murmured, holding up his hands. But the dog lowered his head, his eyes locked, daring anyone to step closer. Every attempt to circle the pit made him snap, his jaws clashing together with the sharp sound of defiance. The townsfolk hesitated. "He won't let us near," one man said, shaking his head. "He'll tear into us if we try." "But look at him," the vet whispered, who had hurried over with her kit. "He's half dead already. Something's keeping him there." The girl tugged at her grandmother's skirt. "He's not mean," she whispered, eyes full of conviction. "He's just scared. He's protecting." The neighbors exchanged glances. Protecting what? And then they heard it too. A faint whimper. Then another. Not from the dog, but from behind him, inside the pit. The sound was so small it almost blended with the rustle of grass. But once you heard it, you could not ignore it. Tiny cries, weak and desperate, carried into the evening air. "My lord," someone breathed. "There are more." The shepherd's snarl deepened as the men shifted. His legs trembled, his ribs heaved, but he did not move from the mouth of the pit. He threw his weight forward, daring them to come closer, his voice ragged with fury and fear. "He's guarding them," the vet said, her eyes softening with realization. "He's not guarding ashes. He's guarding puppies." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The little girl clutched her grandmother's hand tighter, whispering, "I knew it." The men backed away slowly, and the vet stepped forward instead. She crouched low, her movements slow and careful, her voice steady and calm. "Easy, boy," she said gently. "You've done enough. You've kept them safe. Let us help now." The shepherd's body trembled, his teeth still bared, but his growl wavered. His eyes flicked between the woman's kind face and the toddler's wide, innocent eyes watching from behind the fence. He remembered the bread, the soft hand, the words "it's okay." At last his body sagged. His front legs buckled, and he sank to the ground, chest heaving. His head lowered onto the ash, his ears still twitching, but his strength spent. The growl faded into a hoarse whine as though he were pleading, "Take care of them." The vet signaled the men forward, and together they moved quickly. Two lifted the shepherd gently onto a blanket, his body limp but alive, while others leaned into the pit. There, hidden in the blackened hollow, were 4 tiny bundles of fur, no bigger than fists. Their eyes were barely open, their cries weak, their little bodies trembling in the cold ash. The townsfolk gasped, their hearts breaking all at once. Mothers clutched their children closer. Men bowed their heads in shame. "All this time," one whispered, "we walked past this." The little girl pressed her face to the fence, tears shining in her eyes. "Puppies," she breathed. He was saving them. Blankets were spread quickly. The vet lifted the puppies one by one, wrapping them in warm cloth, pressing them against her chest to share her heat. The crowd gathered closer, not with fear now, but with awe. The shepherd, broken and burned, had stood guard over life itself, refusing to leave until someone heard. As the last puppy whimpered softly in its blanket, the crowd fell into silence. For the first time in years, the fire pit glowed again, not with flame, but with the light of compassion burning in every heart that stood around it. And in that glow, the town realized a truth they would never forget. Sometimes the faintest cry can carry the loudest lesson, if only someone is willing to listen. The crowd stood in silence as the last puppy was lifted out of the pit. Their cries were faint, their little bodies trembling in the vet's hands, but they were alive. The shepherd, wrapped in a blanket, lay limp in the arms of 2 men, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. His fur smelled of ash and smoke, his body reeked of hunger and exhaustion. Yet even in his weakness, his head turned once toward the pit, as if to make sure his charges were safe. Only then did his eyes close. "Bring them to the clinic," the vet said firmly, her voice leaving no room for hesitation. The people obeyed. Boots crunched on the dirt as they followed her down the lane, carrying the wounded dog and the whimpering bundles of fur. The toddler ran alongside, her tiny hand clutching her grandmother's fingers. Her eyes never left the shepherd, fear and hope wrestling inside her small heart. At the clinic, the room filled with the smell of antiseptic and the steady hum of machines. The shepherd was laid on the steel table, his body trembling under the weight of exhaustion. The vet's hands moved quickly, checking his pulse, examining his wounds. "Severe dehydration," she muttered. "Malnourished. Bruises everywhere. Burns along the back and paw pads. He's been through fire." The toddler didn't understand all the words, but she understood enough. She climbed onto a stool beside the table, resting her chin on the edge. "Fix him, please," she whispered. The vet glanced at her, eyes softening. "We'll do our best, sweetheart. He's a fighter. He's held on this long because of you." In the next room, the puppies were gently placed into a heated box lined with soft towels. Their squeaks filled the air, weak but insistent, like the sound of tiny bells. The vet's assistant rubbed their sides to keep their blood flowing, offering drops of warm milk through a syringe. The toddler peeked in, eyes wide with wonder, but quickly returned to the shepherd's side. She could not bear to be away from him. Days passed, and the clinic became a gathering place. Townsfolk who had once walked past the cries now lined up with offerings. A farmer brought a sack of fresh hay to soften the kennels. The butcher carried in bags of scraps. Children left toys, an old ball, a squeaky bone, a frayed rope, as if wanting the dog and his pups to know they had friends. Women brought quilts and blankets stitched with care, spreading warmth where ash once clung. The toddler was there every morning and every evening, her small body perched faithfully beside the shepherd's cage. She would press her palm against the bars, whispering stories of her day, humming lullabies her grandmother sang at bedtime. Sometimes she drifted to sleep with her head resting against the cool metal, refusing to leave even when coaxed. The shepherd's recovery was slow, but it came in pieces, like dawn inching over the horizon. His burns began to heal under salves and bandages. His ribs, once sharp, grew softer with steady meals. The limp in his paw remained, but the swelling went down, and with each step he grew steadier. The puppies grew stronger too, eyes opening, paws pushing against the blankets, their squeaks louder, braver. And then one evening it happened. The toddler sat cross-legged in front of his kennel, holding a crust of bread in her palm. She slipped it through the bars, and for a moment, the shepherd only sniffed. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and took it gently from her hand. When she laughed, light, pure, filled with relief, his ears twitched. His tail, dusty and still for so long, lifted slightly and wagged. Just once. The room fell quiet. The vet looked up from her notes, the grandmother froze mid-stitch, and even the townsfolk who lingered in the doorway gasped softly. The tail wagged again, a little stronger this time, and the toddler clapped her hands, her laughter filling the clinic like sunshine pouring into a dark room. "See, Grandma? He's happy," she cried. It was not just a wag. It was a promise. The shepherd, who had stood guard over ashes until his body gave out, was learning that safety no longer depended on his strength alone. For the first time in months, maybe years, he allowed himself to believe he could trust. The puppies, now stronger, tumbled over each other in their box, their tiny tails wagging too, as if answering their protector. The town, once guilty for ignoring their cries, now leaned closer, bringing bowls of fresh water, baskets of food, hands outstretched in care. The old fire pit was no longer just a scar on the land. Its story had moved into the clinic, into the town's heart, and into the bond between a child in a blue dress and the shepherd who had refused to abandon what mattered most. That night, as the clinic closed, the toddler pressed her forehead against the kennel bars and whispered, "You're safe now." The shepherd's eyes closed, his body sinking into the quilt beneath him, and his tail gave one last soft sweep across the floor. And in that small movement, Just a wag of a tail, hope returned, not only for him, but for everyone who had once forgotten how to listen. The shepherd's recovery stretched into weeks, and with each passing day, he grew less like the shadow of a dog found in ash and more like the proud guardian he was meant to be. The puppies thrived too, no longer weak and trembling but playful, tumbling balls of fur that chased one another across the clinic floor when allowed out. Their squeaks and barks filled the rooms, a music that reminded everyone of what had been saved. People began to speak of the shepherd not with pity, but with reverence. They said his survival was more than chance. It was loyalty made flesh, a story of devotion that had refused to die even when everything else had burned away. The tale spread through town like wind through wheat, soft but unstoppable. Children whispered it to each other before bed, men shared it at the diner over morning coffee, and women repeated it in shops and kitchens. The dog who guarded the fire pit, they said, and heads would nod solemnly. He became a living reminder that loyalty is not measured by strength, but by the courage to stay when no one else will. The town itself began to change. Where once neighbors had walked past faint cries, now they stopped to listen. If a stray whined behind a fence, someone came with food. If a baby cried in a store aisle, strangers stepped in to comfort until the mother returned. Small acts multiplied until they became habit. The shepherd and his pups had taught the town something it had almost forgotten. Compassion isn't an extra, it's a duty. One bright Saturday, the toddler in her blue dress walked hand in hand with her grandmother down the market street. At her side, no longer thin and trembling but steady and proud, padded the shepherd. His coat, though still scarred in places, shone now with a deeper strength. A soft rope leash hung loosely from her hand, but he didn't need it. He matched his steps to hers, head low, eyes watchful, loyal as ever. The puppies, not far behind, waddled along in a basket carried by two laughing boys. The market, usually full of bustle, fell quieter as they passed. Stalls filled with apples and bread, bolts of cloth, jars of jam, all faded into the background as eyes turned to the child and the dog. A woman selling flowers reached out and tucked a daisy behind the toddler's ear. "For you," she whispered. The shepherd flicked an ear but stayed calm, his eyes following every movement. A butcher leaned from his stall and set down a bone wrapped in paper. "For him," he said, voice thick. The dog sniffed it once and then looked up at the little girl as if asking if it was allowed. She nodded, and his tail gave a quiet sweep. Even those who had ignored the pit's cries came forward. One old man, his cap in his hands, knelt carefully in front of the shepherd. "I heard you, boy," he admitted, shame in his voice. "I heard you nights ago, and I turned over in bed instead of coming. I'm sorry." The shepherd did not snarl. He only looked at the man, eyes steady and deep, and for a moment the old man swore he felt forgiven. He wiped his eyes quickly before standing, embarrassed by his own tears. The toddler's innocence melted every heart that day. She giggled as the puppies barked from their basket, and each time she laughed, the shepherd's ears perked as if her joy were the sound he had waited his whole life to protect. People whispered, "Do you see it? That bond?" And the answer was always a nod, a hand pressed to a chest, a sigh of something too big for words. The old fire pit, once feared and ignored, did not stay the same either. The townsfolk could not look at it without remembering both their neglect and their second chance. So, one morning, tools and hands gathered there. They cleared the weeds, pulled away broken stones, and swept the ashes clean. In its place, they planted flowers, bright marigolds, soft daisies, tall sunflowers that turned toward the sky. A bench was placed nearby with a plaque that read, "For every voice once ignored, for every life worth saving, listen." Children now came to the garden not with fear, but with pride. They watered the flowers, tied ribbons to the bench, and sometimes sat with their schoolwork in the shade. The fire pit had not been erased. Its stones remained, but now they circled a bed of roses instead of ash. It was no longer a scar, it was a promise. The shepherd, stronger each day, was given a new name by the people. Some called him Ash, because he had risen from the ashes like something reborn. Others called him Guardian, for the duty he had carried long past the point of breaking. The toddler was asked what she thought, and she looked at him, her tiny fingers curled in his fur, and said simply, "Guardian." The word fit and it stuck. A small tag was made, hung on a clean collar around his neck. Guardian, never alone. And so Guardian walked the town not as a stray, not as a shadow, but as a symbol. He was greeted by name at every corner, his pups bounding happily beside him as they grew. People reached out hands not only to him, but to each other, as if his story had taught them that kindness could not wait. The toddler in her blue dress remained at his side always, her small hand resting on his shoulder as if she knew the truth. He had been her hero, but in saving him, she had helped save the town too. The garden bloomed, the market thrived, and the sound of crying, whether from man or beast, was never ignored again. All because one child listened and one dog refused to leave. And together, they reminded a whole town that compassion is not a story told once, but a lesson lived every day. Sometimes the faintest cries rise from the places we fear the most, but innocence teaches us to listen. The old fire pit, once nothing more than a scar of ash and stone, became the very place where compassion was reborn. It wasn't the strong men with ropes or the townsfolk with tools who first answered. It was a little girl in a blue dress, her heart wide open, who heard what others ignored. The shepherd, now called Guardian, had stood his ground in the ashes, guarding life itself even when his body was broken. His survival was not just a story of a dog rescued from fire and neglect. It became a symbol of loyalty, of devotion, of second chances. His tail wag, once thought lost forever, reminded the whole town that hope can return if we dare to give it space. And the puppies, once hidden in the dark, became the living proof of why loyalty matters. Without the dog's courage, without the toddler's compassion, their voices might have gone silent forever. But because one child chose to listen, the town rediscovered its humanity. They stopped walking past cries in the night. They remembered that the measure of a community is how it answers the weakest voice. The moral is simple but eternal. Never walk past a cry for help, no matter how faint, no matter how small. Sometimes what we save is not just a life, but the better part of ourselves. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes loyalty never fades. Like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from.